Section 1. The beginning of trust. When I first married into this family, I knew things would never be simple. Blended families never are. My stepson, Daniel, was polite but distant. He had built a wall around himself, one that I could sense every time I tried to ask him about school, friends, or even just how his day went. He would shrug, give short answers, and disappear into his room. At first, I thought it was just typical teenage behavior, but over time I realized it was something deeper, an emptiness he carried quietly. I wanted to bridge that gap. Not because I felt obligated, but because I genuinely cared. I had stepped into his life unexpectedly, and no matter how hard I tried, I wasn't sure if he ever really accepted me as part of his world. His father worked long hours, and his mother was no longer around, which meant I often became the one present in his daily routines. Yet, even with time, there remained an invisible distance between us. One evening, while I was sitting at the kitchen table, I noticed him pacing in the living room. His shoulders were tense, his face troubled. I asked him what was wrong, but he shook his head. Something in his eyes told me he wanted to speak but didn't know how. I put away my phone, folded my arms on the table and simply said, "I'm here if you ever need to talk." No judgment. For a long moment, he just stood there, caught between silence and confession. That night became the first time he opened up to me. His voice was quiet, uncertain at first, but then the words spilled out. About the pressure he felt at school, the loneliness of watching his friends live lives he couldn't relate to, and the emptiness of losing his mother so young. My heart ached listening to him. For so long he had carried this weight alone, and finally, he allowed someone to share it. I let him try something that night. Something small but meaningful. I gave him the chance to trust me. Just once, without questions, without judgment. I told him to let it out, all of it, without worrying about whether it made him weak or strange. He spoke for almost an hour, and I sat quietly, nodding, listening. For the first time, I wasn't the outsider in his life. I became the person he leaned on. When he finished, he looked at me with eyes that seemed lighter, though still wet with tears. "Thanks," he whispered, his voice barely audible. And in that moment something changed between us. A bond began to form. Not forced, not demanded, but chosen. I didn't know then how much that night would shape the future, or how crossing that first line of trust would set in motion events I could never take back. At the time it felt innocent, almost noble. But what happened next would become something I would never forget. Section 2. Crossing a line. After that night, something between Daniel and me shifted. It wasn't obvious to the outside world, but I could feel it in the small ways he began to act around me. He no longer avoided my presence. Instead of shutting himself in his room, he would linger in the kitchen while I cooked or sit on the couch while I folded laundry. It was as if that one conversation had cracked the wall he had built around himself. And now, slowly, he was letting me in. First, it felt natural. We laughed more, shared stories, and found comfort in each other's company. But soon there were subtle moments that made me pause. His eyes lingered on me longer than they should have, and sometimes his words carried an intensity one couldn't ignore. I told myself it was my imagination, a side effect of my overthinking. After all, he was just a boy learning to trust again. Still, somewhere deep down, I knew the closeness was different. One late evening, I found him sitting outside on the porch, staring at the stars. The house was quiet, his father already asleep. I stepped out, wrapped in a sweater, and sat next to him. For a while we said nothing, listening only to the night sounds. Then in a low voice he said, "You're the only one who listens. The only one who sees me." The words pierced me. I wanted to believe it was simply gratitude, but the way he looked at me, eyes searching, vulnerable, almost pleading, told another story. My heart beat faster, and I felt a rush of emotions I couldn't explain. It was warmth, guilt, and something else I dared not name. I should have pulled away, should have created distance, but I didn't. Instead, I told him, "And you matter to me, more than you realize." The moment hung heavy in the air. I could almost hear the line being crossed, the invisible rule that should never be broken. Yet there we were, suspended between right and wrong, knowing we had stepped onto dangerous ground. In the days that followed, our connection deepened in ways I never anticipated. We shared secrets we had never told anyone else. We confided our fears, our dreams, even the things that haunted us at night. He began to smile more, and I felt a strange pride in knowing I was the reason. But with every laugh, every lingering glance, every late-night talk, I also felt the weight of guilt pressing down on me. It wasn't just trust anymore, it was attachment. And attachment has a way of blurring lines, of confusing hearts. I told myself I was only helping him heal, but in my quieter moments, I questioned my own intentions. Why did I feel a pull toward him? Why did I allow myself to respond when he reached out to me in ways that went beyond the safe boundaries of family? I didn't have answers, only the growing awareness that what began as a gesture of trust had become something more. Something neither of us could easily undo. And though no one else could see it, I knew. We had already gone too far. Here's the full Section 3 continuing in the same emotional, suspense-driven style. Section 3. The weight of infidelity. The more time passed, the heavier the bond between Daniel and me became. It was no longer just about trust or comfort. It was something hidden, something we both carried like a secret we couldn't speak aloud. On the outside, nothing seemed unusual. To his father, to neighbors, to friends, we looked like a normal family. But behind closed doors, in the quiet of shared glances and unspoken words, there was another truth, one we dared not acknowledge openly. I began to notice how differently I acted when his father was around. My words felt measured, my tone careful. Every time Daniel walked into the room, I caught myself tensing, afraid that someone else might notice the undercurrent that flowed between us. A smile held too long. Pause in conversation. Even the smallest gestures seemed like risks. The secrecy wrapped around us, suffocating yet addictive, making every hidden moment feel more significant than it should. At night, when the house grew silent, I found myself replaying everything in my mind. His words, his laughter, the way his eyes seemed to seek me out even in a crowd. And then, the guilt would come crashing in like a wave. What was I doing? How had I let it come to this? I was supposed to be the steady one, the protector, the adult. Instead, I had allowed my heart to wander into forbidden territory, dragging him with me. Daniel, too, carried the weight in his own way. I could see it in the way he avoided his father's gaze, or how his voice faltered whenever family dinners grew too cheerful. He was young, caught between needing someone to lean on and feeling something far more complicated. The innocence of that first night, when he confided in me, felt distant now. We had entered a place where innocence no longer existed. The hardest part was the duality. By day, we acted like nothing had changed. I helped with school assignments, cooked meals, reminded him of his responsibilities. But in the quieter hours when no one else was watching, the truth lingered between us, unspoken but undeniable. Every shared silence, every brush of closeness, every whispered word felt like stepping deeper into a shadow we could never escape. I tried to convince myself it would stop, that if we kept things quiet, it would fade away. But secrets have a way of growing, feeding off the very silence meant to bury them. And the more we tried to hide it, the stronger it became. I found myself dreading discovery, yet equally dreading the idea of letting go. It wasn't just an emotional bond anymore. It was betrayal. Betrayal of trust, betrayal of family, betrayal of the roles we were meant to uphold. And the knowledge of that truth pressed on me every day, heavier and heavier, until even simple conversations with his father left me feeling like a fraud. I knew it couldn't last. Something this fragile, this dangerous, was bound to break. The only question was when, and how devastating the fallout would be. Section 4. The unforgettable consequence. Secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of slipping into the open. Ours was no different. It began with small cracks, moments too tender, glances held too long, words spoken in tones that raised suspicion. I noticed his father watching us one evening at dinner. His brow furrowed as if he was piecing together a puzzle he didn't yet understand. My heart sank, and for the rest of the meal, I could barely swallow my food. The breaking point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Daniel and I were in the living room, caught in one of those quiet moments where our closeness was impossible to disguise. We weren't doing anything out of the ordinary, just talking, laughing softly. But his father walked in at the wrong moment, and something in his eyes told me he saw more than we wanted him to. His expression hardened, and the air grew heavy with a silence that felt suffocating. That night the confrontation came. His voice was cold, trembling with rage and disbelief. He asked questions I couldn't answer, accusations I couldn't deny. Daniel sat frozen, unable to speak, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and shame. I tried to explain, to soften the truth, but the damage was already done. Trust had been shattered, and there was no way to rebuild it. What followed was chaos, shouting, tears, slammed doors. The house that once held the fragile threads of our blended family now felt like a battlefield. I saw the betrayal in his father's eyes, not just as a partner, but as a man who had trusted me with his child. And worse, I saw the confusion in Daniel's face, torn between loyalty to his father and the emotions we had entangled ourselves in. In the days that followed, everything unraveled. His father pulled away from me completely, moving through the house with a silence that cut deeper than any words could. Daniel withdrew as well, retreating back into the isolation I had once pulled him from. But now, the wall between us wasn't built of distance. It was built of guilt and shame. I realized then that what had started as an attempt to build trust had spiraled into something destructive. My choice to let him lean on me, to let him try it once, had set into motion a chain of events I could never undo. I had crossed a line that should have remained sacred, and the cost was the family I thought I was helping to hold together. Even now, I replay it in my mind, the laughter, the secrets, the bond that felt so real in the moment. It had been powerful, undeniable, and yet, in the end, it was nothing but fragile glass, destined to shatter. The memory remains, haunting and sharp, a constant reminder of the choices I made. I let him try it once, and what happened next truly was unforgettable. Not because it was beautiful, but because it left scars that none of us will ever forget.